Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. Today we are diving into Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Picture this, a world just after World War I, where people from the lost generation were living their lives to the fullest due to their war experiences and trauma. This is known as the Roaring Twenties, a time of prosperity and freedom and all that jazz. It was a wild era filled with parties, music, and freedom, but most importantly, it was a time when people became infatuated with one another, even to extreme points. So now let's take a look at the Roaring Twenties and explore how characters were deeply affected to love and how it played a major role in this chapter. We'll dive into Gatsby's obsession with Daisy Buchanan and how it relates to some more present day mental conditions and disorders.
So now, for our thesis, obsessive love disorder is a psychological disease characterized by the feelings of obsession and codependency, which found prominence during the Roaring Twenties, an era marred by significant loss. Obsessive love disorder is a common theme Fitzgerald undertones throughout Chapter 5 through the use of Gatsby and his twisted form of love by showing Gatsby's irrational and erratic behaviors throughout the chapter. Chapter 5 begins with Nick arriving at his house at 2 a.m. in the morning and finding Gatsby in front of his lawn. Gatsby appears to be anxious, and Nick clearly sees through Gatsby's actions and understands his underlying intentions. He knows that Gatsby is trying to get closer to Daisy through Nick, but he still tells Gatsby that he will arrange a meeting between the two of them. Once home, Nick follows through on his promise and arranges a meeting for the two of them to have tea. The day of the meeting, Gatsby sends some of his men to mow his lawn and decorate his house with flowers. Gatsby also nervously shows up an hour earlier with a luxurious looking suit described in the book as white flannel suit, silver shirt, and a gold colored tie hurried in. As Gatsby waits for Daisy, he becomes increasingly unsettled, even to the point of anger. After 2 minutes past the arranged time, Gatsby becomes despondent, saying that he was going home and that nobody was coming to the tea this late. He adds on that he doesn't have all day and begins standing as if to leave. Just as he was sitting back down, Daisy arrives, and Nick goes off to welcome her in. Once she enters the house, Nick hurries her into the living room to meet with Gatsby. Shockingly, Gatsby had seemingly vanished. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and we find Gatsby soaking with water and glaring into Nick's eyes tragically. As Gatsby goes into the living room, he looks extremely nervous and bumps into a clock. He rapidly catches it and apologizes for almost dropping it. The conversation begins, and at first Gatsby and Daisy appear to be formal with each other, and Gatsby struggles with his nerves. As Nick leaves the living room to give them some time together, Gatsby follows after him and tells him, "This is a terrible mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake," shaking his head from side to side. Nick tells him to stop as he's acting like a child and that rude he's being rude to Daisy by leaving her alone. Nick then leaves out the way for half an hour to leave them alone. When Nick returns, the atmosphere is festive and filled with joy. Gatsby seems more confident and is radiating a new well-being energy in the room. As the rain stops, Gatsby invites Daisy and Nick to his mansion. Gatsby starts showing them around his mansion, and it's clear that every detail is meant to impress Daisy. He then starts showing them his fine collections of shirts and numerous other pieces in an effort to demonstrate his gold to Daisy. It now starts raining again, and Gatsby rudely orders Edwin Clipspringer to play the piano for them as they wait. Clipspringer tries making a small talk with the guest, but is brutally cut off by Gatsby and told to cut the chit-chat and get back to work. The chapter ends with Nick becoming more and more obsolete, and turns him into a backdrop to the twisted romance of Gatsby and Daisy.
As stated with our summary, Gatsby seems truly in love with Daisy, nearly to a creepy extent. This causes him to do unusual things, and it is in these moments of peculiarity where Gatsby begins demonstrating characteristics of obsessive love disorder. Obsessive love disorder is the mental illness where someone is so infatuated or obsessed with one person that they feel like they need that person and revolve their life around them. Obsessive love disorder comes from hyperactivity in the orbitofrontal cortex. Often, the orbitofrontal cortex is damaged when someone goes through extreme emotions, which is why people who experience PTSD often find changes in their orbitofrontal cortex. In addition, according to a very well mind, Since obsessive love disorder is not classified as a mental health condition, it is hard for it to have an identifiable cause. However, it has been linked to other mental health disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder. This shows the plausibility of Gatsby having obsessive love disorder and puts the seemingly fairy tale story of Gatsby and Daisy in a more genuine and realistic light. Obviously, it is impossible to conclusively determine if Gatsby suffers from obsessive love disorder. Even so, Gatsby does exhibit numerous behaviors and fits the standard of someone affected with obsessive love disorder. First of all, Gatsby fought in the war and also lost his best friend. This puts him in the category of potentially having the disorder as he most likely suffers from PTSD. In addition, Gatsby met Daisy in the war, possibly attaching her as a sort of rock or safe place for Gatsby, leading to him becoming more obsessed or dependent on her. Moving past that, Gatsby displays numerous examples of him acting in a manner of someone affected with the disorder. The first instance is the fact that he moved to New York and bought the house solely to impress Daisy. In addition to that, Gatsby threw expensive parties nearly weekly for the sole purpose of impressing and possibly garnering the attention of his love. This fits within the parameters, as very well mind claims, a constant need for validation from the person you're in love with to be a sign of obsessive love syndrome. Gatsby himself stated that the sole reason for throwing these parties was for Daisy. In addition, when visiting Gatsby's mansion, he continued showing off his wealth and the luxurious items that he built over the years that were built up in order to get Daisy back. Additionally, a sign indicating obsessive love disorder is a refusal to engage in social activities that don't involve the subject of your affection. Gatsby's behavior somewhat fits into this description, as we know that while he's frequently hosting massive parties in his mansion, he remains detached and simply uninterested in these parties. These parties are of no importance to him and show the extent in which how far he's willing to go in his singular fixation of Daisy. This is all a plan for him in order to receive her validation. Lastly, one of the many ways Gatsby shows that he possibly has an obsessive love disorder is by behaving in a controlling manner with the person you love. Gatsby portrays this character throughout the whole chapter when he's with Daisy, and the behavior he manifests can be seen as unnatural. He displays an abnormal formality and courtesy towards Nick, and especially towards Daisy, which is unusual in regular social interactions. These examples all point back to our thesis, as Gatsby perfectly represents someone who is suffering from the loss he found within the lost generation. Gatsby has clearly suffered greatly from the war and is going through things very similar to those who truly fought in real life. F. Scott Fitzgerald himself most likely suffered from obsessive love disorder. Fitzgerald himself fought in World War I, and when he came out, he faced very similar repercussions as Gatsby did. Like Gatsby, Fitzgerald fought in the war and became somewhat obsessed with a girl. For Fitzgerald, it was his wife Zelda. Their relationship was often described as insane, with both often breaking up, fighting, but at the end of the day, neither was truly able to separate from one another. Once again, this is a trait of obsessive love disorder, with both being seemingly attached, to Fitzgerald being most likely suffering from obsessive love disorder, and demonstrating some of the backlashes of war in his character Gatsby. Fitzgerald most likely portrays himself in Gatsby and gives the readers a genuine look into someone suffering from the effects of war.
Now, for our essential question, we will be using the Module 1 question. How does the American dream inspire or oppress individuals as they define themselves as Americans? In this case, we will argue that it inspires, because throughout the novel, we see that Gatsby's obsession with Daisy is tied to the American dream. This is because he believes that having wealth will lead him to be with Daisy and seek the happiness that he wants. He believes that being a successful person and possessing these luxurious items will impress Daisy and make her see him as worthy of her love, especially since she is currently in a relationship with Tom. We can also see this when Nick asked Gatsby if he inherited his money, and he said he did, but he ended up losing all of his money during the Great Panic. Gatsby then says that he ended up getting it all back in just 3 years, doing some confidential business, like oil money and drug businesses. The Roaring Twenties was known as a time of economic growth, where countless people were becoming rich, and people like Gatsby took advantage of this. This is what created the American dream, as many people were inspired to be successful and have great amounts of money after the Great War. They wanted to live life to the fullest. As said before, many people who experienced the war ended up with trauma and wanted to live their lives to the fullest, thus pursuing wealth. Secondly, the pursuit of wealth became a new thing that led to the inspiration among Americans during the Roaring Twenties, who were chasing after money and expensive materialistic stuff. Thus, for Americans, having more money means they can lead a comfortable life, and therefore, the American dream is something that many people seek after.